If you want a vision of the future, Winston, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Someone is trying to teach me a lesson in futility. Why am I the only one who isn't killed?
They will run you dizzy. They will pile falsehood on top of falsehood until you can't tell a lie from the truth, and you won't even want to. That's how the powerful keep their power. Don't you read the papers?
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
I'm going to get your money for you. But if you don't get the President of the United States on that phone, you know what's going to happen to you?
What?
You're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola Company.
The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime.
Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It's my pleasure to have Paul and Phillip Collins back on the show. They've returned to discuss an article of theirs, Weaponizing the Arts. Paul and Phillip collaborated in writing The Hidden Face of Terrorism and The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship. They are frequent contributors to Conspiracy Archive. They're also working on a book right now called Invoking the Beyond. How's that coming along?
It's about 636 pages deep right now, according to the Word document that we have it in. So we're hoping to be done with it sometime this year. We're hoping probably by fall or winter, the latest. But there's always something new to add, it seems. And, just when we think that we got one section done, we find something new to put in. And we're trying to be as comprehensive as we can. The approach that we were taking with the book is, what if this is the last book we ever write on the topic? So, taking that kind of, working from that kind of paradigm, you try to get everything in, that you can.
Yeah, the filmmaker Terrence Malick, of course, who, he did the film The Tree of Life and The Thin Red Line. He used to have an output of about every 20 years. So he'd put out a film, and then like 20 years would elapse, and then he'd decide to make a new film. And with that approach, he approached every film as though it were his last film. So once I'm done with this film, I'm going to die. And that's the approach. That's kind of the approach that we've taken. We want to ensure that this book qualifies as the last statement on the topics contained therein, and we just want it to be as comprehensive as possible. Plus, it doesn't help when you're working 12-hour shifts at your job.
Yes.
But hopefully, before too much longer, it'll be ready to go. We apologize to all the readers out there who have been waiting and waiting and waiting. For what it's worth, we're every bit as impatient as they are to see it. So it will either finish it off or it'll kill us. I don't know which will happen first, but hopefully this will be the year you see its release.
And we believe it's going to be worth it because just the sources cited alone are phenomenal. We got some sources in there that people probably have never heard of. Some things, some different sources that people aren't accustomed to seeing and have probably never seen before. So just the sources alone make the book a good reference point for going to finding other finding other books and finding a different body of literature than that people weren't aware of before concerning the topics that are in the book.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and briefly, what would be like a really brief synopsis of what it's about? I know it's a long book, but what's the invoking the beyond? That's kind of what exactly are you invoking there?
Sure. The beyond is basically a narrative construct. If you think of international relations and politics as something of a text, something of a narrative, then the beyond becomes this narrative construct that is invoked by those who hope to wrest absolute control over the global power structure. The beyond is basically a set of circumstances, a situation, some sort of surrogate for divinity, for God, that is invoked by the global oligarchical establishment in order to epistemologically and ontologically overwhelm existing governmental institutions. Institutions of representative government, parliamentarian forms of government, democratic forms of government. And through this invocation, with these institutions of traditional representative government thoroughly overwhelmed epistemologically and ontologically, the global oligarchical establishment can then present a deus ex machina to act as a solution. So, for instance, one of the most fantastical manifestations of the beyond would be extraterrestrial visitation or invasion of the Earth. Clearly, this is a set of circumstances that representative government, that parliaments, that congresses, that representative bodies have not had to deal with before, and so the powers that hope to be the global oligarchical establishment, deviant elites, can use that set of circumstances to present a deus ex machina. Well, these forms of government are no longer up to date enough. They're outmoded and antiquated for dealing with alien visitation. Ergo, here is global government, this amalgam of all the nation states into a single supranational entity. And this is the only means by which we can interface with the aliens or combat them, one of the two. And that's one of the forms that the beyond takes, is alien visitation or invasion. Another form that it takes is climate change. This narrative where the angry Mother Earth, the Gaia, is basically retaliating against humanity for its alleged environmental degradation and its interference in the natural order of things. And so once again, we have a set of circumstances that representative bodies, that democracy are incapable of really addressing. And so once again, what is the solution presented? What is the deus ex machina that the global oligarchical establishment presents? World government. And this is basically the overall thesis of the book, is that the beyond exists as this narrative construct introduced to the narrative of international relations, to politics. And the beyond arises out of the epistemological experiments of Immanuel Kant from the era of the 18th century Enlightenment. Of course, Immanuel Kant basically advanced this disjunction between noumenon and phenomenon, and by that I mean phenomena is the world of appearances, the world as it is perceived, and noumenon is the Ding an sich, the thing in itself, the objective reality of things. And according to Immanuel Kant, there was never any way to really apprehend the Ding an sich. There was never, ever any real way for man with his hopelessly flawed epistemic faculties to ever understand objective reality. So all we're really left to see is the simulacrum, the what is the world of appearances. And in this sense, Immanuel Kant really kind of qualified as a modern Gnostic, because he really advanced this notion that all is illusory or potentially illusory. And so the beyond arises from that, because if we cannot know the world as it is, its objective reality, but we can only know its appearances, then to every world there must be a beyond. There must be something that far outstrips man's epistemic faculties. So at any rate, that's from whence the beyond arises, and that's the function that it serves for deviant elites, for the global oligarchical establishment. It really helps them to provide a rationale for the introduction of a form of governance that is expedient for them, namely global government, the amalgamation of all nation states into a technocratic world state.
And Immanuel Kant, by the way, he was one of the first people to lay out the idea of a kind of universal republic. He actually put forward his own notion of world government, and suggested the imposition of this kind of universal republic that was ruled according to the dictates of Enlightenment rationalism. And so it's almost as if he had a political manifestation of the philosophical ponderings that he had reached with the concept of the beyond.
So basically it's a pretext for establishing institutions and political methods for control, whether it's
and that's one of and that's one of the reasons that the book has taken so long, is because pretext planning has been a centerpiece of what the global oligarchical establishment has done in not just in this century, but in the preceding centuries. Mm-hmm. It's just it's a centerpiece of practice for them, is pretext planning. And so the examples of pretext planning go on and on and on ad nauseum. And again, it involves, this concept of the beyond, something that just dwarfs our epistemological spectrum and calls for the wiping away of old institutions and the introduction of a new institution. We start off with the super weapon, which the super weapon it takes on many different manifestations. It was either a gas weapon, a biological agent, or then a laser weapon in old science fiction books, and then it gradually evolved into the idea of a nuclear weapon, namely the nuclear bomb, and beyond that, a space weapon. And of course, that would dwarf man epistemologically speaking, and necessitate the rise of a world government that could manage the super weapon. and manage the proliferation of that superweapon. And from there, we moved into UFOs because the cult of the superweapon, kind of seamlessly evolved into the UFO deception, because the whole UFO narrative presents this idea that nuclear test and the use of nuclear weapons is what drew the attention of extraterrestrials to our planet. They saw the bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima going off somehow through their, vastly superior technological know-how. They detected those things going on, and that's what drew them to the planet and created either there's two different narratives with the UFOs. There's hostile aliens, and then there's benign or benevolent aliens. And so it either create the appearance of UFOs on the scene and the appearance of extraterrestrials creates either a crisis of defense or a crisis of diplomacy. Because either national governments are deficient in terms of defending us against the hostile aliens, or they're deficient in terms of providing a diplomatic response to the aliens, because no one government can represent humanity in toto. So those are two examples of the beyond, and then of course we do address also the climate degradation, environmental catastrophe scenario in the book as well, which is yet another example of the beyond. But this kind of pretext planning, this kind of exploitation of fictitious crises or manufactured crises goes back so far that to catalog it all, it's almost encyclopedic in nature. It's a vast topic, and it's hard to cover it all in one place. And that's is when you're trying to be comprehensive, covering this topic, it takes a long time. And that if we have another book after this, the topic is certainly going to be a lot more narrow, so as to allow for an earlier release date.
Yeah. So, okay, well, look forward to that. All 1,000 pages. But yeah, it's one of these things. It's a broad topic. It's obviously what you're dealing with a broad psychological program designed to alter the consciousness of humanity, and that's the long. If you look at the long curve of all this stuff, it's all the crises. It's always a problem of nationalism or ethnic differences or religious differences. And this gets into the sort of the ecumenical approach or attempt to kind of try to blend all differences and do away with all distinctions and under this globalist model, so we can all be absorbed into the corporate Borg.
That's correct. Yeah. That's correct. And as traditionalists such as René Guénon or Fritjof Schuon, those individuals of that school, who admittedly have their flaws, but as they correctly pointed out, ecumenism leads to degeneration of civilization, because it destroys the self-sufficiency of all the different religions and all the different groups, and the blending is always based on expediency. It's always based on the pursuit of this worldly power.
Yeah, secular vision of things.
Yeah. So the blending isn't based on seeking to commune with reality or commune with truth. It's simply based on the consolidation of power for a privileged few, and so you can see where the exploitation of humanity is inevitable in that regard.
Yeah, and what I find so fascinating about this is, as I read more about this, the whole idea of dialectics that play in this. I got this largely, I think it was James Billington's book, Fire in the Minds of Men. Well,
That's an excellent book.
The whole approach, how the whole revolutionary mindset or faith derived from these occult societies, Freemasonry and these things, and how it promoted simultaneously extreme individualism and collectivism, and all promoting a sort of a secular view of things with the goal of breaking down, I guess, traditional societies that contain firewalls, whether it's ethnic or cultural, or boundaries like borders, all so you could break down all ultimately to atomize society itself, so they could be the people could be absorbed.
Well, the reason that the revolutionary faith manifested itself in those different extremes, those different groups that appear on the surface to be totally opposed to one another, is because of the rallying cry for revolution, which was fraternity, equality and liberty. All of those are contradictory concepts. You can't have fraternity and equality at the same time. Fraternity instantly implies elitism of a sort, and
you can't have community without being exclusive. You have to be exclusive to have a community, so you have to exclude somebody.
Right.
If you say in the name of integration or such, everyone has to be together. All of a sudden, then you have no community. It's just a catchphrase. It's a slogan like land, bread, and peace. Like Lenin talked about land, bread, and peace. It's to fool everybody.
Right, and you see dialectics in practice with the 18th century Enlightenment and the many secret societies that populate it. I believe in Fire in the Minds of Men, James A. Billington characterizes the Bavarian Illuminati, founded, of course, by Adam Weishaupt, as a neo-Manichaean organization. And, of course, Manichaeanism was a Gnostic Persian religion, a Persian Gnostic religion. Actually, St. Augustine was initially an adherent of that religion until he converted to Christianity. Unfortunately, some of the Gnostic baggage remained with him, as is evidenced by the anthropological and concomitant cosmological pessimism that kind of taints his theology. But with Manichaeanism, you had basically a partitioning off of humanity into these two immutable soteriological categories, one of the damned and the other of the elect, which, first of all, this was part of the problem of Gnosticism, was that it rendered soteriological statuses immutable. The dynamicism of human nature was basically disregarded, so man could not change. So if you happen to inhabit the kingdom of darkness, that is where you would remain, and that would be your perennial misfortune. And if you happen to have the good fortune of being one of the elect, well, then that's where you remained. And there was no allowances for change made. Also, there is this basic with this particular epistemology, this Manichaean epistemology, the complexities and nuances of humanity are basically disregarded, and people are just foisted into these binary oppositions where one sort of person can be considered completely and totally irredeemably evil, and another sort of person completely and totally good, irrespective of what they do. So you have a self-righteous exceptionalism there.
Your microphone, let me see.
Oh, can you hear me now?
No, I can hear you fine. You were muffled there for a couple seconds.
Oh, okay, okay. But you see this sort of binary opposition with, for instance, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, which of course was a dialectic advanced by Karl Marx, and all of this is derivative of those ancient heresies, in particular Manichaeism. And you see it all throughout the Cold War. The proverbial empire of evil, for instance, as it was invoked by Ronald Reagan. This partitioning off of humanity into these immutable soteriological categories. And these soteriological categories carried with them certain political ramifications, which was basically war to the hilt with no hope of ever coming to a mutual understanding between the two polar extremes, and the eventual syntheses of the two systems, which basically results in an amalgamation of the worst features of the two. And all of this dialectical process is just simply derivative of those ancient heresies, in particular Gnosticism.
Mm-hmm. So, I know we are talking primarily about your article, Weaponizing the Arts, but before that, of course, we had the passing of Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Yes.
He passed away on Friday, I believe. Of course, he was the strategic theorist, national security advisor to Jimmy Carter during the hostage crisis, and also the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. He was a consultant to many presidents. Like Henry Kissinger, he was foreign-born, but he cast a long shadow over U.S. foreign policy, which I think is interesting. But ultimately, he seemed to be employed by the Rockefellers.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on the passing of Mr. Brzezinski?
Oh, he will be dearly missed.
Well,
what circle of hell is he inhabiting?
Yeah. When you brought this up to us off the air as a topic for discussion,
sorry. Okay, your mic is going in and out there.
Okay. Can you hear me all right now?
I hear you fine, but occasionally it gets muffled and comes back. Is it being moved or something? Or
yeah, it's being moved. Here, let me position.
Oh, you're sharing a mic. Okay, so just that's what the issue is. Okay, just okay.
All right. When you brought this up, as off the air as a topic for conversation today, I took some time to contemplate it, and what came to mind was E. Michael Jones, and an observation that Michael Jones made concerning Soviet communism, which is certainly a product of globalist manipulation, and What E. Michael Jones said is that Soviet communism basically had the lifespan of a man, and he said this on your show, which was your interview with him concerning neoconservatism, which is arguably one of my favorite shows that you've done with him thus far, and he pointed out that the leaders of Soviet communism were all in their 20s back in the 1920s, and then the leaders of Soviet communism back in the 1970s were all in their 70s, because the system, the whole idea of Soviet communism was so bankrupt that they failed to replicate themselves and pass on their ideas and successfully proselytize future generations to where it would have any longevity. So it had the lifespan of a man. Soviet communism did, and it reached it went along. Its lifespan followed the lifespan of its founders, going from their 20s into their 70s, and then they slowly began to kick the bucket until today. There's very few, I think, really significant ideological communists left in Russia, and they certainly don't hold the position that they once did. I think that the same principle applies with the globalist. I think that globalism has the lifespan of a man, and they have been unsuccessful in proselytizing, future generations. I know that George Soros, who's up in his 80s, and he could be the next one to kick off. He has 2 sons right now, but I don't know what kind of commitment they really have to the globalist ideal, and how much of their father's view they've imbibed. So, will they be able to successfully carry the torch? That's very questionable. Zbig leaves behind Mika Brzezinski. And Mika she likes to come off as very bright, but if you've watched her execution when she's on MSNBC, she's obviously not as she lacks the profundity and the intellect that she thinks she possesses. She's nowhere near what her father was. She doesn't have the nuanced and sophisticated approach that her father. She doesn't have the nuanced and sophisticated approach that her father was. Just betrayed her stupidity, where she said, the Trump administration is trying to tell people what to think, or the Trump movement is trying to tell people what to think, and that's our job. Mm-hmm. So basically she gave away the open secret that the media, in particular MSNBC, tries to play social engineer as opposed to journalist, and just blew the cover right there. So Zbig's passing, he's coming shortly upon the heels of the passing of David Rockefeller. Henry Kissinger might be next. He's 94 years old. I've read an article in The Atlantic where it says that even at 94 years of age, he has a burning desire to influence people and to convince them of the rightness of what he's saying. So he's going to try to proselytize people like Trump, who are in power right now, and he has had, some dialogue opened up with Trump, but it's questionable, to what degree he'll be able to influence Trump. And then he'll move on into eternity. And so these people have been very ineffective as of late in self-replication. So I think that with the passing of people like David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski and whoever comes next, because these things usually happen in threes, and it could be any of them. George Soros is in his 80s. Kissinger is in his 90s. All the Rothschilds are really in their 80s. But whoever comes next, that with the passing of this old guard, will glow. Are we actually seeing a corresponding death of globalism in general? In other words, is the globalist ideal passing away with the globalist? I think that's what we're seeing. I think that with the death of Zbig and with the death of David Rockefeller, we're seeing the corresponding death of globalism. It's not just the death of globalists; it's the death of globalism, generally speaking. The future generations of globalists, they have a very diluted understanding of the globalist ideal, and I just don't think that they have the dedication of that old guard to pull it off and to maintain the ideas the way that the old guard did.
Mm-hmm. Nor do they have the intellectual prowess of their progenitors. Again, Mika Brzezinski standing as an exemplary model of the sort of intellectual prowess you can expect from the new guard. I mean, she's not an especially bright person. There's brighter crayons in the box than she. But hey, Joe Scarborough loves her, so I mean, that's his mess now. Welcome to the joys of marriage.
But are we going to recognize the same phenomena that E. Michael Jones recognized and noted concerning Soviet communism? Are we going to see that same phenomena play out with globalism, where globalism is just going to have the lifespan of a man? Because with the old guard dying off, you're not seeing they failed to self-replicate. They failed to properly indoctrinate, a new and upcoming a new line of globalists. So with Kissinger and Zbig and David. Well, Kissinger isn't, of course, gone yet, but he could be the next one. With the passing of these people, are we seeing, globalism dying on the vine? That's what I think we're seeing. That's what I believe.
Yeah, both with Brzezinski and Kissinger, we see the lieutenants for the Rockefellers that were pretty much, I would say, the handlers for various presidents. One was Carter with Brzezinski, because Carter was picked by David Rockefeller, I think, at his Tarrytown estate. And Brzezinski was sent in there to sort of handle things. And, of course, Kissinger insinuated himself into the Nixon campaign in 1968 and played an important role, some people believe, in extending the Vietnam War so he could use that to get elected, his secret plan. Nixon sort of had the first October surprise with Kissinger. But these guys, they represented, you can see a direct link to these, these banker elites, these oligarchs, controlling the overt political process and sort of manipulating things behind the scenes, and also creating these various crises that some people have identified. Of course, Afghanistan and the Soviet invasion, that was precipitated by Brzezinski's suggestion to Carter in the summer of '79 to start funding, Islamic radicals or fundamentalists in Afghanistan to create a crisis to lure the Soviets in to, quote, deliver to them their own Vietnam. And with Kissinger, of course, you've had some suggestion that he might have played a part in fomenting the crisis in Iran, because I believe he was the one that convinced Carter to take in the Shah.
Yeah, to take in the Shah, and this, of course, infuriated the activists over in Iran and led to the hostage crisis.
Yeah, and allowed Chase Manhattan to hold on to the frozen assets for forever.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, these are the games that they play, and so those two figures also I like the interest they're both foreign born, which says so much about our foreign policy establishment, I think.
Right.
Being captured.
And if you'll notice the games that you mentioned there, and we've talked about both of those at length before in the past, they were very sophisticated games that were being played. Mm-hmm. And it just shows that these guys were bastards, but they're brilliant bastards.
Yeah, compared to like what's going on in Syria today, where it's just in your face.
Yeah, and I look at the people that stand to replace them, and I'm sorry, I just don't see that same intellectual prowess. Nor do I see the kind of dedication that the old guard had to the model of world order that they conceived. Over time, the globalists failed to deliver on any of the utopian promises that they made, and so naturally, there's going to be a kind of cynicism that sets in among the younger generation as a result. So, are you really going to have the die-hard kind of dedication to building the house of world order that you once had? I really don't think so. So I think that with these old guard, globalists dying off, you see the corresponding death of globalism and the whole concept of a new world order dying off as well. It's just more evidence of this thing dying, which is what Philip and I have been contending for a long time, that eventually, one way or another, the system that they've built and the model of world order that they've imposed will crumble. Reality will begin to step in, and one of the ways that reality steps in is mortality. You can't live forever. And if you can't live forever, you cannot guarantee that your vision for the world will last forever. And, there's no guarantees even when you do, effectively indoctrinate your youth. And, so if there's no guarantee when you effectively indoctrinate the next generation, there's certainly less of a guarantee when you ineffectually indoctrinate the next generation. And so the chances that the people that they leave behind are going to continue building what they started is very low. It's just it ain't looking good.
One thing that's interesting, I think, with Brzezinski is with Brzezinski, and you look at his career, that we get a glimpse in when we talk about the elite, that it certainly isn't monolithic, because with Brzezinski throughout his career, he came to blows, or at least had conflicts with other factions, particularly the neoconservatives. I believe in the 60s, he resigned from the State Department over America's escalation in the Vietnam War. So he was opposed to that, and I think we've talked about what that. There was a split within the elite of the Vietnam War, with the Southern Rim versus the East Coast establishment, and you also have later on he was never a neoconservative, although he was a rabid interventionist. He certainly did his fair share of scheming, but he wasn't a neoconservative. He opposed the war in Iraq in 2003.
Well, when you sit down and you read his book, 97, I think it is, The Grand Chessboard, you can certainly see where he contributed to the neoconservative ideal, but you can also, when you read that book, you see that the neoconservatives deviated from his prescriptions in a lot of ways. He never meant for the United Nations to be shelved the way it was when the neoconservatives began to play out this kind of imperial geostrategy. I mean, he says in the book, well, you need to upgrade, the more antiquated structures and bureaucracy in the United Nations, and prepare it for its new role in the world as a governing body. And so what's implicit is that the American empire is supposed to fold into a world government, and the way that the neoconservatives took the whole thing and implemented imperial geostrategy was so sloppy that it might have set the United Nations on a course of not only obsolescence but eventual death, joining the League of Nations in the graveyard. And Zbig certainly didn't want that. We do live in the world that he created in some sense because, he revived the elites. In my opinion, he revived the elites' love affair with Alfred Mackinder by drawing their attention back to Eurasia.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, I mean, if you look at our world today, every other person has a loved one that's over in Afghanistan, and so you can thank Zbig for that.
I mean, I have nephews that have joined up into their career into the military, and I have all their parents. They talk about they're ready to go, but they're all worried about where they're going to end up. They're going to end up someplace where they shouldn't be. Yeah, that was my advice. I said, well, my advice when they think about going, I said, you shouldn't do this because you might end up in a place where you shouldn't be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I worked with correctional officers with prior military service, and I've known ones that have done 2 or 3 tours in Afghanistan. And so we live in the world that he in some sense created. That being said, the world that he created is crumbling. Our involvement in our standing over in Afghanistan now is precarious at best. And the idea that we can last out the entire century there is laughable, in my opinion. Will we be able to even last out the next decade over there? The Eurasian powers are starting to align against American hegemonic power because under Bush it was just too crass. It was overtly imperialistic. It didn't have the subtle characteristics that Zbig, wanted it to have, and so it led to these counter alliances over in Eurasia. And they might successfully, solidify a kind of Eurasian alliance that successfully expels the United States from that region at some given point in time.
Yeah. No, what was revealing was, of course, in his own words about his attitude towards, self-government. He had nothing but contempt for it because he thought that democracy, I don't like democracy at all, but I'm saying the idea that the government should be responsive to the will of the people and have some sort of accountability. He said that, well, that's inimical to imperial strategy, so we can't have democracy. We have to have imperial mobilization is compatible with democratic government. So we can't have democratic government, more or less. That's the trade-off there. But his values, his outlook on the world. He says, and he wrote, to put it in a terminology that harkens back to a more brutal age of ancient empires, the three grand imperatives of ancient imperial geostrategy are to prevent collusion and maintain security dependence among the vassals, to keep tributaries pliant and protected, and to keep the barbarians from coming together. And that was his vision of the modern world, of how he thought how the world should be governed.
Right.
But,
if you read Frank Fisher's book, Technocracy: The Politics of Expertise, in that book, Frank Fisher explains how technocratic ideas today have carried on under the banner of post-industrialism.
Mm-hmm.
And post-industrialism was it's kind of assumes some pejorative connotations, and many theoreticians who advance that particular model of society are aware of that fact,
mm-hmm.
one of whom was Zbigniew Brzezinski. And so he introduced a neologism of his own, which was meant to hopefully camouflage some of the pejorative connotations of post-industrialism. And that neologism was the technotronic era.
That's right. And that's what got the attention of David Rockefeller, correct? And that's why he put him in the Trilaterals Commission. Right?
Absolutely.
And the Trilateral Commission has what shaped our world today, because if you look at what happened with China, Nixon's
mm-hmm.
rapprochement with China,
mm-hmm.
Carter,
yep.
and he was a key man behind Carter, pushing for diplomatic recognition of China back in 78, 79. And, of course, he's working for David Rockefeller.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing to also note is in Frank Fisher's book, Frank Fisher also critiques neoconservatism. And one of the things that he notes about neoconservatism is that while neoconservatism expresses this ostensible disdain for policy professionals, for information elites, neoconservatism basically advances its own cadre of ostensibly conservative policy professionals and information elites,
mm-hmm.
its own cult of expertise. And in that sense, neoconservatism really just qualifies as another variant of the technocratic paradigm. And so you see where, with Zbigniew Brzezinski and his opposition to the neoconservatives, that feud between the two was superficial at best, given the dialectical commonalities there of certain technocratic ideas that are embedded in both schools of thought, both in Zbignew's school of internationalism and in the school of thought of neoconservatism. And so, yes, the two did superficially conflict with one another, but one must wonder, had Zbigniew Brzezinski been alive longer, if that would not have resulted in a Hegelian synthesis between the two schools of thought.
Yeah, because all these philosophies or ideologies or strategies are more or less toys for the banker elite.
And I'd like to also point out, we're also traditionalist, and we see many of the flaws with democracy too. What we believe to be fatal flaws. The idea of the consent of the governing the governed, the government,
It's always a cover for oligarchy, yeah.
Yeah. It's really a cover for oligarchy because you always can manufacture consent through media, and that's become more effective as time has gone on. The sun and shade and technology.
Which will dovetail well in our discussion about the weaponization of the arts, I think.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. But, traditionalists have accepted the fact that after the American and French revolutions, democracy became something of the default setting for the world. So we work inside that context.
Yeah.
And
at least try to hold these scoundrels to their own rules they create.
Well, one of the things that we put the bastards to the fire, the bastards' feet to the fire on, is the aspect of representative government. And Brzezinski was totally against that. Mm-hmm. And whenever he mentions, democracy in a poor light, it seems to be a jab directly at its characteristic of representative government.
That's right, because their crisis of democracy wasn't mob rule. Their crisis of democracy was people becoming awake or conscious of what was going on.
Right, exactly. And when they're conscious of what's going on, they make more educated decisions, and those educated decisions are represented at the ballot box. And this could lead to the possible dethronement of the oligarchs. Mm-hmm. Well, he saw this, and later on in life, he began to talk about this disturbing resurgence of democracy. And what he meant was a resurgence of representative government and populist sentiment. And I forget the exact terms he used, but he became really uppity when it came to people's pushback against the oligarchs and against the power structure. And I personally think that he was, when he talked about the dangers of this upswell among the masses, that he was foretelling the future, that he basically predicted the demise of globalism. And, his crystal ball is just as fuzzy as anybody else's, so he didn't know if it was going to happen in his lifetime or not. But what he basically was seeing was the demise that would come after his death. He was warning the other oligarchs about it, trying to rout this problem, trying to cut it off at the pass, trying to nip the rise of the revival of populist sentiments, trying to nip it in the bud, but it's not going to be successful. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the contributions he made before his passing, is the foretelling of the death of globalism. And so he probably, when it came to his political aspirations, when it came to his ideology, he probably died a very pessimistic and sad man. And on that note, I'd like to point out that Henry Kissinger, when he talks about the New World Order nowadays, he's not as enthused as he was as when he was a younger Henry. Mm-hmm. And there's actually some skepticism and some cynicism that's mixed in with his talk about the whole concept now. And so I think in some sense they know that the idea is dying off with them.
Well, we can only hope, but what will replace it?
Well, that's a good question, but I really do think that that the lesson to take away with the passing of these old line globalists, the main theme to pull away with it is the inevitable death of globalism. The next question is, like you said, to deal with the substitute, because we certainly don't want something worse coming in some kind of savage, anarchistic vision of the world on par with Mad Max.
Yeah, something. Yeah.
And cartoons will never be the same because Woody Woodpecker is dead. Oh. I'm sorry. I know that's terrible to make light of somebody's death, but he did look like Woody Woodpecker. So.
I remember the one last thing I'd like to add to it. I remember back when we were in college, our anthropology teacher, we were talking about Zbigniew Brzezinski to him, and he said to us, he's like, "Have you ever noticed that when he smiles, his eyes don't smile?" and that's the truth. It really, when you look at the man, his hard exterior kind of captured the kind of cold and really indifferent kind of vision for the world that he had in mind. That this kind of cold indifference for the common person, and just the soullessness of globalism.
I just wonder if he's still taking orders from David Rockefeller where they are. So.
Well, you brought up Ray Kurzweil when we were talking off the. I really everything that Kurzweil and the transhumanist suggest, I really think are just pipe dreams. I don't think they'll ever download their conscious into a computer.
Yeah.
I don't think that they'll ever find a way to cheat death. I think that the best thing that they have going for them is get a Jack LaLanne juicer and live the best that you can in your later years, but expect it to come to an end at some point.
Yeah, it's probably that and the illegal organ trade, human organ trade. That they, I don't know, how many heart transplants did Rockefeller have? And
it was reputed to be 6. Who knows?
How does he get on that list so often? That's amazing.
Yeah. I wonder if it's the same way.
Well, there's always some poor bastard that nobody's going to miss.
Yes.
That was the myth of democracy. I remember once somebody explained it to me in a nutshell. So the myth of democracy says that you and I have the same influence as David Rockefeller because we all have one vote. Sure, that's how it works.
Right.
Okay.
I just wonder if it's the same in hell. Maybe David's kicking back in a lawn chair and he's just barking orders to Z-Big. Hey, shovel my coal.
Yeah,
Keep the furnace going. Come on. Yeah.
Oh well, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. You also you penned this article, "Weaponizing the Arts." I'll start. You write in this article. I'll begin it with the opening paragraph. I'll let you take it from there. You write. You both write. Popular opinion tends to regard philosophical discourse as the province of academia's hierophants. There is good reason for this self-imposed intellectual segregation. On a theoretical level, philosophy can be somewhat tedious, given the field's justifiable insistence upon the clarity of definitions. Philosophy is replete with specialized terminology that typically requires explanation by theoreticians. As a result, few people are eager to engage in discussions concerning the various Weltanschauungs populating the marketplace of ideas. Yet philosophical outlooks abound, and they are held by both neophyte and adept. Thus, the question arises, how are belief systems engendered among pop culture's novice-level thinkers? According to Christian apologist Ravi Zacharias, most people are not introduced to philosophy through the superstructure of theory. Instead, they are exposed to an infrastructure of the arts, which has shaped the national mindset in everything from determining war strategy to electing presidents to finding one's identity in cars and deodorants. That's a great intro, by the way. That's a good choice. Good quote.
Thank you.
So, weaponizing the arts. It's why are the arts?
Well,
I mean, by arts we mean it can be poetry, it can be art. I mean, like sculpture, painting, entertainment, movies, music. So, why are the arts so important?
Well, to answer that question, we can turn to the case of Paul Linebarger. Paul Linebarger was a psychological warfare expert who actually wrote science fiction under the pseudonym of Cordwainer Smith. And Linebarger's significance in the halls of government was by no means minuscule, as is evidenced by his role as an advisor to President Kennedy. Additionally, this influential science fiction author worked for the CIA and acted as a psychological warfare advisor to the military. These unusual credentials distinguished Linebarger from the average writer. Moreover, they also underscore the intermittent convergence between the literary genre of science fiction and the intelligence community. In 1948, Linebarger wrote and published the book Psychological Warfare, which was basically a textbook over propaganda that the United States Army used for several years. One particular excerpt from this book actually emphasizes the role played by literary personalities in the promulgation of propaganda. And therein, Linebarger writes, and I'll quote him verbatim for the edification of the audience, and I also encourage the audience to go and look up his book. It's simply titled Psychological Warfare. You can probably even find a copy on Google Books, and of course there's several copies that you can find on Amazon.com. But Linebarger writes in this book, quote, "Almost all the best propagandists of almost all modern powers have been, to a greater or less degree, literary personalities. The artistic and cultural aspect of writing is readily converted to propaganda usage. Elmer Davis is a novelist as well as a commentator. Robert Sherwood is one of America's most distinguished playwrights. Benito Mussolini wrote a bad novel. Mao Zedong is a poet and philosopher, as well as a Communist Party boss. Down among the workers in the field, such American novelists as James Gould Cossins, Pat Frank, Jerome Weedman, and Murray Dyer have worked on U.S. psychological warfare. Though literary men have converted their writing to propaganda purposes, few of them have gone on to define the characteristics of a specific conversionary literature or to compile canons of literary style applicable to the propaganda field. The contributions may lie in the future," unquote. Now, it's
good stuff.
very telling quote. That's one of the reasons why I recommend this book to the audience.
Linebarger, Psychological Warfare.
Linebarger, yeah.
Linebarger, Psychological Warfare.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, that's no problem. It's basically Linebarger. Paul Linebarger. People will probably, though, recognize his work under the pseudonym of Cordwainer Smith. He wrote quite a bit of science fiction novels under that pseudonym.
Interesting.
Now, let's look. Yeah. Let's look at, carefully at what Linebarger just said. He makes it abundantly clear that the artistic and cultural aspect of writing predisposes the discipline to certain propagandistic applications. There is good reason for this applicability. Art and culture are closely related to one's Weltanschauung, a term that loosely translates from German as worldview. However, this translation really fails to fully encapsulate the meaning of the word. A Weltanschauung is the fundamental orientation of a person or a society. It encompasses values, themes, philosophies, emotions, and existential questions. A Weltanschauung is, in essence, the framework of philosophical beliefs and ideas guiding one's interpretation of the world. All of the constituent elements of a Weltanschauung are reflected by one's art and culture. So, control of one's Weltanschauung stipulates control of art and culture. And such control is precisely the objective of psychological warfare. The very appellation of psychological warfare is derived from the German word Weltanschauungskrieg. That's a term that was cribbed from the conceptual lexicon of the Nazis in 1941. The word literally means worldview warfare and denotes the scientific application of propaganda, terror, and state pressure as a means of securing an ideological victory over one's enemies. William Wild Bill Donovan, who was the director of the Office of Strategic Services in 1941, believed that the Nazis' psychological warfare methods could act as models for Americanized strategies. Psychological warfare eventually became part of the United States intelligence community's operational lexicon. Donovan believed the concept to be so significant that it would inevitably become a full arm of the United States military, basically equal in status to the Navy, to the Air Force, to the Army. So controlling a target population's Weltanschauung has always been the objective of psychological warfare. The objective is to reshape and resculpt the interpretive lens through which the person views the world, so that they will view the world as you would want them to view it, not as it actually is. Yet the propositional content of a Weltanschauung, of a worldview, is not best conveyed through academic discourse. And we make this point with the opening paragraph of the article. How many Americans truly, really concern themselves with metaphysics, ontology, epistemology, ethics, and other philosophical disciplines? Now, clearly the answer is only a few. And there's good reason for this. Philosophical discourse tends to be somewhat tedious because it has an emphasis upon terminological exactitude. And this emphasis ensures the clarities of one's definitions, which is essential in the formulation of any coherent Weltanschauung. Now, while terminological exactitude certainly is desirable, it also necessitates a reliance upon a rather elaborate lexicon of somewhat esoteric vernacular. And not many average Americans have the time or patience to familiarize themselves with that lexicon.
Their eyes will glaze over rather fast, yes.
Oh, golly. You just mentioned the word epistemology. I've mentioned it many times sitting at dinner in McDonald's, and automatically I've lost my audience. Nobody really cares. Let's talk about America. Readings for fairies. But
can't you just say knowledge? I mean,
you could. You could.
Can't we just talk about America? Yeah.
What? Speak American.
Well, they say goldfish have longer attention spans than Americans now. So,
why give goldfish such a bad rap?
Whenever we talk about the cartelization of epistemology, there's always inevitably there's, and there'll probably be some in the comment section to this show.
Yes,
there's always somebody that's got to scream and yell and cry about it, as being as being tangential, as being intellectually too much of a stretch, and they want to abandon it and cut directly to the chase. We're talking about different groups like the Illuminati, all the way from the Illuminati on up to the Trilateral Commission. They just don't want to talk about the really what lies at the heart and soul of the deep political game.
Right. Well, and also I would like to add that philosophy's emphasis upon terminological exactitude is well warranted. It is very, very important because in philosophical discourses, clarity of definitions is essential. I'll give you an example. Let's take, for instance, the debate over human origins, which typically involves evolution. Well, if you notice with many an evolutionist, many a new atheist, many of the people who argue for the evolutionary narrative, the grand narrative of Darwinism or neo-Darwinism, they never clearly define their terms. They never clearly define evolution. What do you mean by evolution? If by evolution you mean adaptation within a species, where a species tends to adapt to its environment, but the ontological fixity of that species, the species' essential defining traits as a species remain immutable. Okay, fine. That seems to me to be a reasonable enough definition. But then they say, well, no, that's not evolution. Evolution actually challenges ontological fixity of species, and it results in this kind of sorcerous transmutation of one species into another. And then you call that into question because obviously that's a process that has never been observed, one that's not borne out by the fossil record, and one that kind of lapses into an incoherence. And then they object to the evolutionist and the new atheist objects to your critique of that particular definition of evolution. And so consistently they shift their grounds definitionally concerning the term evolution. Mm-hmm. So with philosophical discourses, you must have terminological exactitude. What do you mean by the words that you use? Let's have clarity of definitions. Let's just not toss about words like a veritable cotton candy. And so that's why philosophy has this very technical lexicon, this very elaborate esoteric vernacular that most Americans really don't want to trouble themselves with. It's not for the sake of just sounding good at dinner parties. It's not, and trust me, you're not going to pick up chicks talking about epistemology. It's about the clarity of one's definitions. You have to have clarity of definitions. I mentioned earlier Kant and Kant's theory of knowledge, his particular epistemological experiment. Well, when he invoked this disjunction between phenomenon and noumenon, many theoreticians took issue with his invocation of the term noumenon, because the term noumenon does not quite mean what Kant takes it to mean. Noumenon in the world of classic culture and philosophy, noumenon was associated with the nous, the mind. Mm-hmm. And it basically suggested an immaterial dimension to reality. And
the eye of the soul.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Kant invokes it just to simply mean the Ding an sich, the thing in and of itself. And theoreticians like Schopenhauer actually took him to task for that. But long way around the barn, terminological exactitude, certainly desirable. Terminological exactitude in philosophical discourses, absolutely essential. But again, not many people are going to pick up a book over philosophy and familiarize themselves with that particular vernacular.
And maybe this is why relativism and vagueness seem to play such a huge role within the deep state, because vagueness and relativism allows them to play fast and loose.
Yeah, plausible deniability.
Yeah, and change things up as they go along as an expediency and to suit their needs, whatever needs might be at that very moment in time.
So given the lack of appeal of philosophical knowledge and the refusal to familiarize oneself with philosophy as a discipline,
can I interject one point here?
Sure, please.
You made it about terminological exactitude, use of these words, using these these $5 words. The vocabulary, the language itself is I think a principal you could say an example of culture. The language itself. So therefore, it's also a primary weapon. It can be weaponized very easily in psychological warfare, political correctness, the language we're allowed to use, what words mean. Good example. Well, Michael Jones made a point about the English language itself. It's a very poor language when talking about philosophy. It's the language.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a language of commerce. And Americans speak.
I like what E. Michael Jones points out. He says he points out that it does no justice by the concept of a logos.
Yeah, look
it
at
just says word.
Look at the
it's
word love,
word.
right? The word love in the English
Oh,
language.
absolutely. There's in the original Greek, there's actually 4 different words for love because there's 4 different types of love.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's storge love, there's phileo love, there's eros love, and then of course there's agape love.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that, you know, okay, not every sort of love is going to be agape love, which is, you know, like that God's perfect love for humanity. Not every love is going to be phileo love, which is the love of one's friends, or storge love, which is the love of one's family,
Mm-hmm.
or eros love, which that term is from which we etymologically derive the term eroticism. Eros love being sexual love. And yet here in the United States, love wins.
Mm-hmm.
Love wins.
Love trumps hate.
Yeah, love trumps hate. Well, what do you mean by love? And is Eros love reserved for every sort of union that there is? Should there be Eros love between, say, for instance, a father and his younger daughter? Obviously not. But the term love is invoked with such ambiguity and in such a nebulous sense that now you have, you know, the veritable normalization of pedophilia.
Yeah. I love ice cream means very something different than I love my son to I love my wife.
Not if you ask Bill Nye, of course.
Yeah, exactly. He fuses all of them, doesn't he?
Yeah. Well, look at his show, which was an absolute exercise in just complete retardation. He actually has a segment of his show where he was, you know, advancing this gender fluidity nonsense, where you have one flavor of ice cream arguing with another flavor of ice cream. And of course, the analogy is that sex is like ice cream. I like chocolate. Well, another person likes vanilla. Another person likes strawberry. Can't we just have them all? And at the end, there's this enormous orgy of ice cream in a bowl.
Yeah, when I enjoy a banana split, 9 months later, I don't get a baby to take care of.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the whole problem is you have this an exercise in disanalogy with that.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes such exercises in disanalogy possible? A lack of terminological
exactly. Yeah. Yes. Another point is as the weapon of language is the attempt to dumb down everybody so they have such a limited vocabulary, prevents them from the ability to articulate, not just to articulate a thought, but even to have the thought. Because human beings need words.
Well, in our book, one of the things that we go into at length is the Prussianization of the West. And if you look at the Prussian educational model, you know, which is where we get compulsory schooling, mm-hmm. there's supposed to be 3 tiers, and the lowest tier is supposed to receive just the lowest form of education, only the most rudimentary of skills, just a skill set that allows them to carry out menial tasks. And so you're not going to give them, the kind of extensive vocabulary or reading skills that you're going to give to the third tier, the Realschulen, the elite that receive the educational gestalt, that receive a holistic education.
Is this why they're giving the masses Twitter?
Yeah. But also I'd like to point out that terminological confusion has also played into deep political games because they've been able to use terms like humanitarian mm-hmm. and they lack
reproductive rights.
Yeah. But with humanitarian, humanitarian aid or a humanitarian mission, humanitarian crisis, they've kept that term nice and vague enough to where covert operations and the destabilization of governments have taken place under the quote-unquote humanitarian banner.
Yeah,
And,
Libya, Syria, yeah.
Yeah, we have to go in there because there is a humanitarian need. And invariably, the sick irony of it all is that we go in the name of carrying out a humanitarian issue, a humanitarian mission, and destabilize a country, whether it be through the CIA or through the funding of proxy groups. Destabilize the government, the legitimate government is deposed, and then real legitimate humanitarian crises follow thereafter. And it's like with Syria, because if ISIS, if al-Nusra, if al-Qaeda has their way and all, you're going to see Christians and Alawites being massacred en masse because you won't have Assad there protecting them any longer. So the confusion of terms has also helped along, different covert operations, different examples of sinister kind of interventionism in the affairs of other countries.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And, it's a responsibility to protect and these things, yeah.
Right. So at any rate, so you really don't have the average American wanting to trouble themselves with this burdensome constellation of specialized terminology. Nobody really wants to, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but very few really want to sit and learn about it. And so the question arises, how do people arrive at their philosophical outlooks? Because irrespective of whether you're a hierophant of the academy or you happen to be an utter neophyte, you happen to be just an average, everyday, ordinary American, everybody still has a philosophical outlook. So how do we arrive at those outlooks? Well, average people do not typically arrive at their outlooks through the superstructure of theory, because theory is far too burdensome, far too difficult sometimes to apprehend. Instead, they arrive at their Weltanschauung through an infrastructure of the arts. Now, this reality is exemplified by the philosophical movement of existentialism. You had existentialists like Sartre, Camus, and these guys did not concern themselves with the formulation of syllogisms or logical argumentation. Instead, they distilled their outlook through artistic mediums such as novels and theater. For instance, playwrights like Beckett and Ionesco actually affirmed the dysteleological premises of existentialism through their own brand of anti-theater. Plays like Waiting for Godot and The Bald Soprano, Endgame, plays like those, the theater of the absurd, were intentionally incoherent, illogical, and meaningless. And this sense of futility that was conveyed by these plays was reflected by the existentialists' somewhat Gnostic attitude toward the cosmos. Like the ancient Gnostic, the existentialist viewed the world as a sort of cosmic abortion, bereft of meaning and bereft of purpose, a horrible cosmic mistake. In a more rigorous logical arena, however, such a view is easily refuted. If the universe were actually meaningless, then one could not expect any dysteleological proposition to be accepted as a meaningful one. But the existentialists, like Sartre, exhausted vast amounts of paper attempting to meaningfully convey a philosophy of meaninglessness. Look at Being and Nothingness. This is a running joke that we have with Jay Dyer.
Yeah.
Being and Nothingness clocks in at over 500 pages. That's 500 pages wherein Sartre attempts to meaningfully convey a philosophy of meaninglessness. So, so you can see where the existentialist outlook is one that's easily refuted. in the arena of actual philosophy. So it's really an untenable belief system. But how did existentialism rise to prominence? Well, you had a corresponding artistic movement with it that romanticized it, that made it appear to be something that was noble. Man was analogous to Sisyphus rolling his boulder up the hill, not knowing why, allowing the boulder to roll back down the hill, but finding meaning in the struggle. And in finding meaning in the struggle, man is somehow ennobled. And Camus conveyed this theme through his book, The Plague. In the book, The Plague, there's really not a great deal to the book, The Plague. There's not much in that novel. The plague comes, the plague kills, and the plague leaves. But what Camus concerns himself with in that novel is how man stands in the face of ontic evil, how man stands in the face of senseless violence and senseless death. And through that particular novel, he romanticized the existentialist outlook. But notice that neither him nor Sartre nor any other existentialist, Kierkegaard, none of them really concerned themselves with things like logical argumentation, syllogisms. They really didn't involve themselves in those, because if they were to, then they would have rendered their own belief system untenable. So they relied upon the arts. So at any rate, the internal contradiction of the dysteleological outlook really belies the true motives of those who invoke it. Those motives are articulated rather candidly by none other than Aldous Huxley. And Aldous Huxley confessed that the philosophy of meaninglessness was essential. It's essential in the enterprise of liberation. It was an instrument of liberation. The objectives of political and erotic revolt are rendered ostensibly tenable by the philosophy of meaninglessness. He himself said it. We wanted this world to not have a meaning because it freed us. It freed us morally, ethically. We could pursue our own erotic revolt, in particular against the Christian outlook, but also against all ordered outlooks, all traditional outlooks. So ultimately, the philosophy of meaninglessness camouflages revolutionary objectives. And how is that philosophy of meaninglessness distilled? Through the arts. Now, according to Aristotle, art was man's outward expression of an inner esteem for beauty, which was encapsulated in the qualities of harmony and balance. And as such, art performed a function that was beyond practical utility. It didn't increase or enhance the means of subsistence production, nor did it maintain the machinery that sustained society. Art can't fix a tractor so that you can plow a field. Art doesn't really help you fix a car. It doesn't fix your plumbing. So art didn't have an application that fell within the realm of practical utility, but it did. It did, however, approximate man's inner yearning for beauty and truth. Classical philosophy typically associated beauty and truth with the good, and that's capital G good. Not surprisingly, the term ethics is etymologically related to the term aesthetics. What is good is beautiful. So there has been this historical conflation of what is good with what is beautiful. And this is what art in classical culture was meant to capture, the good and its beauty. A textbook example of art's utility in the conveyance of philosophical outlooks, of course, is existentialism, which didn't really concern itself with the good or the beautiful. It concerned itself with rendering life meaningless, purposeless, and freeing people to seek their own self-aggrandizing and erotic aims. So that leads us to the question: how does this work? How is art used as something of a weapon. How does art change society? How does art change culture? Well, to answer that question, I would refer the audience to an essay by Martha A. Barter. Martha A. Barter wrote an essay entitled Normative Fiction, and I can't recommend that essay enough. And in that essay, she makes it clear that, in particular, the literary genre of science fiction doesn't necessarily make people behave in ways that they otherwise would not. That perception of science fiction actually engenders either the tacit justification for propaganda or the reverse, which is the explicit justification for censorship. But science fiction does present readers with possibilities, and it's with the presentation of possibilities, the presentation of choices, that the normative power of science fiction is most effectively demonstrated. And let me read a excerpt from her essay for the edification of the audience. And again, this is from the essay Normative Fiction. I urge everybody to go and pick up a copy of it. I think you can find it on Google Books, and it's in several compilations of science fiction literary scholars. But she writes, quote, "Fiction can represent possibilities for action to a large number of people in such a way that they can more clearly perceive possible choices and the various sociocultural sanctions attached to those choices. The very act of considering choices irrevocably alters our assumptions about ways we may act, and since actions derive from assumptions in the sense that both doing and choosing not to do must be considered actions, fiction can indeed endanger the status quo. The censors are right for the wrong reasons," unquote. Now think about what she just said. Considering various choices and their concomitant sociocultural sanctions can actually call the status quo into question. And this reality is exemplified by the very act of heresy, which is etymologically derived from the Greek word choice. That's really all that the word heresy is. It's considered something of a passé term nowadays, but that's really what heresy meant, was choosing, choice. And there can be little doubt that choosing to formally deny a core doctrine of a faith will likely produce weighty consequences for both the denier and the belief system being questioned. For instance, you have the heresy of Arianism, which precipitated the First Council of Nicaea and the composition of the Nicene Creed. But whatever your stance happens to be on that particular theological controversy, Arius's choice, his choice, and its concomitant sociocultural sanctions within Christian orthodoxy cannot be understated. As a matter of fact, it led to the entire I don't want to say excommunication of Arius, but basically the church broke ranks with Arius and sent Arius and his followers on their way. Likewise, the propositional content of a fictional work can either partially or completely conflict with the dominant cultural conventions of any given society. Audiences that are exposed to that the propositional content of a particular fiction will invariably consider choices that could potentially revise the status quo. Michael Hoffman, and I have my reservations with Michael Hoffman as a researcher. In particular, I think he engages in quite a bit of anti-Semitic invective, but whatever the case may be, he did make a salient observation. He stated that a sales pitch is most effective when the consumer is unaware that he or she is making a purchase. A prescription can be rendered more tenable within the body of an imaginative narrative. Once fiction starts making prescriptions, it becomes normative in character. And you see this in most modern fiction. That's not to say that a normative fiction, that a normative claim of every fictional work is automatically nefarious. It really depends on the normative statements that are being made by that particular piece. For instance, Uncle Tom's Cabin and Uncle Tom's Cabin's normative statements concerning the institution of slavery. Clearly a desirable one to be made. But then you have more of a dubious normative claim. For instance, you take for instance 2001: A Space Odyssey. Really, what you see in 2001: The Space Odyssey is man, in a Nietzschean sense, slaying himself and migrating beyond his humanity and basically becoming superhumanity, being endowed with deific traits. And of course, that sort of apotheosis is it's a little bit more problematic given the fact that humanity is not perfect. And humanity probably lacks the requisite skills to be an effective or a desirable deity. But nevertheless, that's the normative claim that is tacitly conveyed through 2001: A Space Odyssey. Mm-hmm. So at any rate, the nature of the normative claims being advanced through a particular body of fiction will determine whether or not this fiction is actually, whether it's actually, a work of art and a work that is desirable, or whether or not it's a nefarious enterprise. Take for instance the Transformers movies with Michael Bay, the master of the explosion. Mm-hmm. He's actually legitimized explosions as a form of artistic expression now. In order for him to receive all of the military assistance in those films, he had to allow the Pentagon to review his scripts. And notice how there's a great deal of jingoism in those films. There's an enormous amount of there's an enormous promotion of America as a military power and the desirability of America's militaristic campaigns abroad. And again, that normative claim, it's deeply embedded in the narrative. It's not explicit, but it is implicit. While we're spending all this time watching robots beating the hell out of one another, many audiences are just excited by this spectacle and this wonder, the entire time being insinuated beneath that veneer of entertainment is the normative claim that America as a hegemonic militaristic power is desirable.
It's the normal thing. It's the normal thing, and that's
right.
Part of the spectacle of war. That's what CNN and Fox News and these other stations play a big part in, and just the routine, coverage of missile attack here. Donald Trump orders a missile attack on Syria, and the fact that there's no discussion on what the heck does the President of the United States have the right to order a missile attack on a sovereign country so far away, from the shores of the United States, presenting no threat to the United States, yet it just become normal. And
right.
That's why it was Brian Williams talking about how the beautiful missiles
the aesthetic qualities of it and describing it as beautiful.
Yeah, so militarism becomes the norm because of the aesthetics of it. We enjoy it.
Exactly, exactly, and that goes back years and years and years. I remember there was the old John Wayne movie, The Green Berets. Mm-hmm. Most Vietnam veterans will tell you that movie is the least the least accurate depiction of what war in Southeast Asia looked like, and all. But it glorified that particular militaristic campaign, and just made it look like it was a good thing that we went in there and made a country that's greatest export was rice. We were so destructive over there that they actually had to import rice into the country for years afterwards because of just how we just bombed the hell out of the place.
Yeah, I think now they make T-shirts. They don't export rice anymore. And I think
and that it really helped glorify not just the military but also the military's campaign in Southeast Asia, even after it brought about a schism and ripped asunder the oligarchical establishment here in the United States, and brought about this chasm between the Southern Rim elites and the northeastern Yankee elites that's never been fixed. And even as it was causing a strain on our economy and causing foreign investment to flee and causing all this flight because of the debt it was racking up. Mm-hmm. This movie justified it and glorified that particular kind of militarism, and as a result, even after the detrimental effects of that particular kind of militarism played out and became obvious to everyone, that same militaristic kind of practice continues with us to this very day, with interventions in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and even possibly Syria in the near future. I do not rule out the possibility of boots on the ground in Syria.
Right, and another point that this underscores, this imbuing of aesthetic value, the imbuing of these militarism with aesthetic value, and just atrocities with aesthetic value in general. What it comes to underscore is the imposition of this aesthetic template upon what would be otherwise very repugnant acts. You take for instance Aristide. Aristide, I believe it was Aristide, talked about the beauty of necklacing, which was a practice.
Yeah, they got that from the ANC.
The practice of the Communist African National Congress, which basically involves the placement of a tire around a person, the dousing of that person with jet fuel, and then setting him on fire. The process of dying in those instances took an agonizing 20 minutes. 20 minutes. And yet Aristide spoke of the beauty of this means of dispatching people. And it's very much there, very much prevalent, this imposition of an aesthetic template upon repugnant acts in our own American culture. Again, Brian Williams speaking about the aesthetic appeal of war, of militarism.
Yeah.
And that really kind of underscores the disparity between classical culture and modernity's view of art.
Yeah, there was a book called War Made Easy, and also a documentary film. And in that, he talks about the history of war and so how actually most of the media promoted the Vietnam War for most of the war. They had admiration for the B-52 bombers and kept going on. So this is a wonderful machine here, and shoot ahead to the future further along into the Gulf War, or the second Gulf War, 2003, and they've always cut some Fox News talking about daisy cutters, and they have the graphics of the various weapons and weapon platforms that are being used, and the the newscasters are just you're just enamored with these machines of death, and it's
right,
promoted,
exactly, and seldom if ever, you notice, Tim, seldom if ever do you ever have the opportunity to view the existential consequences thereof. We can marvel at the drone and how the technological wizardry of the drone, but seldom do we marvel at what the drone does when it flies over a village and basically indiscriminately kills civilians, children, women, just everybody.
Based on crappy intelligence.
Yeah, based on,
we just wiped out a wedding party in Yemen because we believed there to be a known terrorist in proximity to it.
Right.
What they call it, a dispositional matrix or something, or whatever the term they use to justify the bombing of the village or wedding party.
But with the imbuing of repugnant acts and violence, the imbuing of that with aesthetic value, you have underscored there a disparity between modernity and classical culture, and how modernity and classical culture regarded art differently. Again, in classical culture, art was regarded as the means by which man's inner yearning for the good, capital G good, was expressed. Art was meant to basically reflect that inner yearning for the good. In contradistinction, modernity holds a decidedly pragmatic view of the arts, as is evidenced by the discipline's co-optation by corporate interest. So the logos has been supplanted by corporate logos, which collectively convey the word made marketable. Where Michelangelo sought to capture the divine with his portrait on the Sistine Chapel, today's graphic artists seek to capture the minds of consumers with corporate iconography, and typically they employ logos that are patterned after deeply resonant mythic archetypes to sell everything from shoes to tampons.
Andy Warhol?
Yeah. And if you'll notice that there's a great deal of similarities and parallels between corporate logos and, for instance, religious iconography, the iconography of traditional religions. I'll give you for instance, one of the more prevalent ones that has been used is the proverbial Christ pose, Christ upon the cross. And nowadays, whenever there is a particular figure that pop culture wants us to view as a martyr, many a times they are situated in a very similar pose, in the pose of Christ upon the cross. And so you see where though now art and aesthetics, it no longer reflects this inner beauty. Instead, it is made to make something marketable, to make something palpable for the audience. But at any rate, returning to Martha A. Barter's essay over normative fiction, and this is where we see how normative fiction and the normative statements conveyed through fiction, we see how it actually really does shape society. She discerns this inherent ambiguity to normative fiction. As products of specific time periods, fictional tales tend to uphold some of the cultural norms of the respective historical eras. But simultaneously, fictional tales can present possibilities that are rendered feasible through elements such as settings, themes, characters, all of those narrative devices. And when audiences are presented with these fictional devices, they tend to suspend their critical faculties and accept fantastical propositions. And in so doing, audiences entertain alternative ideas and values. Propositions are tangibly enacted, and a new consensus is considered. And let me read Barter's quote again for the edification of the audience. And I apologize, but to read it verbatim actually drives home the importance of what's being said here. She writes, quote, "On the one hand, every fiction arises from a particular time and place. It demonstrates to its hearers/readers a tacit consensus regarding cultural norms. On the other hand, and at the same time, it can introduce to its readers possibilities that they previously did not know or had not considered, and make the possibilities vividly real by fictional devices such as plot, character, setting, etc. Through a willing suspension of disbelief, readers conduct sociocultural Gedanken experiments. They test how such ideas might work in reality and what effects they might produce, and consider the possibility of a new consensus," unquote. Now, for the edification of the audience, Gedanken experiment is the German word for thought experiment. The famous science fiction writer and editor John W. Campbell, who of course wrote the short story Who Goes There, which was eventually made into a film during, I think it was the 1950s. It was The Thing from the Other World, and then it was later on remade by John Carpenter in 1984, I think, as just The Thing. But John W. Campbell proposed that science fiction presented an unparalleled opportunity for sociocultural thought experiments, Gedanken experiments.
Well, War of the Worlds, the Brady Bureaucrats, 1938.
There you go. Yeah. Exactly.
An experiment.
It was, and what happened? What happened with the implantation of this notion of alien invasion in the mass conscious of the public? What sort of ideas were entertained? Well, you see in War of the Worlds where at one point H.G. Wells in the novel, H.G. Wells states that the Martians had underestimated man and man's ability to unify and to be organized. And what he was tacitly conveying in that one particular passage was the desirability of a homogenized world civilization, which, of course, H.G. Wells, I don't know that H.G. Wells had coined the term New World Order, but he certainly popularized it through his one book entitled The New World Order. And H.G. Wells, a basic perusal of his particular credentials reveals a person who was actually committed to the goal of the establishment of a global government. But exactly, you see where now with these ideas firmly embedded in the public conscious, people begin conducting sociocultural Gedanken experiments. They start testing to see how the idea might work.
If I might add here, H.G. Wells is considered to be, he's regarded to be the first futurist. And futurism is a discipline, it's a school of study which looks at possible futures. And then it selects the preferable futures, whatever the futurist considers to be the preferable outcome, and determines what kind of mythologies, what kind of mythic narratives are necessary to bring that possible future into being, to make that possible future the inevitable future. And H.G. Wells, he referred to this idea as foresight, and foresight evolved into today's notion of futurism and into the futurist school of this futurist discipline. and many futurists are involved in the writing of science fiction, and so that's an important point to add at this juncture.
I think I don't know if Alvin Toffler actually distilled a lot of science fiction concepts.
He's a futurist.
Through a theoretical medium.
Incidentally, also he was the guru for Newt Gingrich, who's supposed to be a conservative that's seeking to bring seeking to bring back traditionalism, and yet he had this kind of heavy reliance on Toffler and Toffler's different concepts and thinking.
Yeah. Well, if you look at again John W. Campbell in an interview with the Saturday Review, he basically argued that the science fiction genre's principal social role was that of prophecy, and when he invoked the term prophecy, he didn't simply mean the imaginative anticipation of future events. No, he invoked that term to mean the preparation of audiences to embrace a specific vision for the future. And Campbell's contention that prophecy constituted science fiction's chief social role underscores the genre's imposing normative potential. So the question is not whether science fiction can change society, but how. The nature of the cultural shifts induced by sci-fi depends upon the nature of the normative claims that inspired them. The more dubious an author's normative claims, the more ominous their existential consequences. For instance, the techno-utopian premises of much science fiction can be somewhat troubling, especially when you consider the questionable outcomes of other historical utopian projects, such as communism, fascism, and other variants of socialism. Surely the techno-utopian might argue that unfettered scientific progress will facilitate social progress. But you have theoreticians like Theodor Adorno, for all his flaws, he still correctly identified a distinct disjunction between scientific progress and social progress. Just because you have the latest iBook doesn't mean you're a better person.
I think that it's important to point out at this juncture, the concentration camps of Nazi Germany were known for their efficiency. Were known for being quite effective and efficient in doing what they were doing, but that didn't lead to a betterment of mankind. It didn't lead to greater things for humanity. So technological improvements did not necessarily lead to a social improvement corollary there.
Oh, look at the Maxim gun or the machine gun, automatic weapon fire.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Or well, of course, the development of nuclear weapons or other types of weaponry, or or today now with as technology delivers conveniences to us, it also denies us of our dignity and our privacy.
Absolutely.
And therefore changes our expectation. Kids now have no expectation of privacy.
Right.
And they develop no proper, the proper discretion that kids were.
Right.
Yeah.
But you look at especially, and I know I'm singling out in particular science fiction, and we're discussing art in general, but in particular science fiction has historically, much of it has advanced this erroneous conflation of scientific progress with social progress. Mm-hmm. And those two are not necessarily inextricably linked. Again, efficiency and technological advancement does not make the human being a better person. It just doesn't. just because you have the latest, cell phone or the latest iPhone, that does not mean that the darkness within you has somehow abated.
And yet, quite opposite, because you don't develop empathy, you don't interact with people, you don't suffer the consequences of, if you stalk someone on the internet or tease them on the internet, you don't see their face. Where in the old days, if you're a kid in the playground and you say something that hurts someone's feelings, you might see their reaction. And for most people, they develop, maybe I shouldn't say that. On Facebook or social media, you don't get that reaction. That's why you have so many psychopaths on social media.
Right. And the transhumanist idea of downloading your conscious in a computer and achieving immortality. The idea that that's a social advancement and that's a betterment of civilization, of society, that somehow brings good things to mankind is very questionable, because as Orthodox Christianity points out, God allows for death and actually turns death into a blessing, because death leads to the cessation of sin. Mm-hmm. Well, if David Rockefeller is uploaded into a computer, his evil goes on ad infinitum, because all he was evil brilliance, evil genius. Even nearing the end of his life, he was unrepentant. And so the idea that he could just continue on with his Machiavellian schemes indefinitely by jumping from computer to computer is that's not a betterment of humanity. That doesn't bring about some great leap for mankind. It just that's so again, scientific progress is not the same as moral advancement or social improvement. It's not the same thing.
You mentioned interesting. You mentioned the Rockefellers there, because you use a term here in the article, aesthetic terrorism. The terrorist aesthetic or aesthetic terrorism. Of course, the Rockefellers were big funders of aesthetic terrorism, mainly through modern art.
Absolutely.
And there's an agenda there. Now, I'm in the middle of Saunders' book, The Cultural Cold War.
Yeah, we relied on that in the article.
In the article, and of course, part of that was the promotion of American culture, and there's a notion there. I think it was it was that historian for the Kennedys, the court historian. What's his name? What's his name? German.
I'm running down it in my head. The Rolodex. He said Schlesinger. Schlesinger. Yeah, it was Arthur Schlesinger. The Best and the Brightest.
Yeah, he goes.
No. Best and the Brightest. Sorry, forgive me. Halberstam wrote The Best and the Brightest. Arthur Schlesinger preceded Halberstam, and he wrote about Kennedy and Camelot and all of that.
Yeah. Now he says he said that there was a sense that the Soviet Union was mobilizing its intellectuals, and we needed to do the same. Now, the problem with that is once you mobilize artists and poets and intellectuals, it's inevitably totalitarian.
Yeah. Well, what we suggested in the article, what we say is we asserted that it was a trap.
Yeah.
That the Soviet Union was laying a trap, and that the West took the bait, because the Soviet Union was going on this propaganda kick of presenting the American cultural landscape as bland, as dry. They described it as a desert, and what they were suggesting is that this bland cultural desert that we supposedly had betrayed a kind of deficiency in our democratic institutions, a deficiency in our democracy. Well, it didn't betray that at all. What it's shown is that we had moral restraint, but they, what they wanted is they wanted us to jettison moral restraint and embrace abstract expressionism, and then have all of the cultural anarchy that would come about as a result of that. Right. And so the West took the bait,
But who
And
were pulling the Soviet strings?
yeah, well, exactly. And I mean, like at the height of the Cold War, there's a Chase Bank branch in Moscow.
So there's a dialectic that's being played here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the West took the bait, and when they took the bait, they made a Faustian pact. They tapped the deep state. They turned to the deep state to help with this, to help with pushing expressionism. Because in 1947, Americans they absolutely hated abstract expressionism.
Mm-hmm.
There was this exhibition that was going around, and it was paid for by our State Department, called Advancing American Art. And when it reached the United States, Americans hated it. Harry Truman hated it. Harry Truman said that, he said, well, if that's art, then I'm a Hottentot.
Yeah.
And so it was
1947, folks.
yeah. So I mean, the American political establishment had to tap the deep state, which was in its, I don't want to say in its embryonic stages, but it was very young at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And they turned to a notorious, notable and recognizable portion of the deep state. They turned to the Central Intelligence Agency.
C.D. Jackson, right?
Yeah, the C.D. Jackson, all of those guys. Well, and the CIA was willing to oblige because they wanted to engage in this kind of dark social engineering from the very beginning. I mean, really, all that the CIA was it was a kind of enforcement arm for the northeastern, Ivy League elites that saw themselves as the de facto rulers of the country and wanted to solidify that rule, and saw the weaponizing of the arts as one way of solidifying that rule. Mm-hmm. And the CIA had already been involved by the time that it was tapped to advertise on the part of abstract expressionism. The CIA had already been involved in the weaponization of the arts. They had set up a division called the Propaganda Assets Inventory, and the Propaganda Assets Inventory had just played this very, very important role in shaping American media. I think that at the height of its power, the Propaganda Assets Inventory had an influence on 800 different media outlets, newspapers, magazines, the different entities that are involved in public information.
Yeah, this is Frank Wisner's Mighty Wurlitzer.
Yeah, this certainly goes in. This certainly goes into it. His office of policy coordination and their involvement in I want to say it was Mockingbird.
Yeah, Operation Mockingbird. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe they were involved in it. For all of his faults, and he certainly was a tyrant. He was an evil, cruel bastard. Tyrannically ruled over the FBI for 3 decades. J. Edgar was right when he referred to Wisner's OPC as "quote unquote" Wisner's gang of weirdos, mm-hmm. because the things that they were and something we talk about in the book at length that I can't go into here because it just goes off on a tangent. If McCarthy had been successful in investigating Wisner, and then a lot of a lot of this may have never manifested.
That might have been McCarthy's fall because McCarthy was on to something that he didn't quite understand. At least that's how it looks to me. Yeah.
He was seeing things through a very distorted interpretational lens. He thought that Wisner's affair with this Romanian princess meant that Wisner was possibly a communist or under communist influence. And if you had looked deeper into Wisner's background, and if the and if he had brought public scrutiny and the public eye, the public spotlight upon Wisner and the OPC, he would have found a completely different beast, which was involved in activity that went a lot further than domestic communism, a lot further, and it might have led to Wisner's dethronement and the horrors of Mockingbird and Operation Gladio may not have come about. Or, well, let's put it this way: it would have been a lot more difficult to bring about those activities, because Wisner was instrumental in both of those.
But with the promotion of sort of this avant-garde culture, it's weaponized, and as you say, it's by attacking art, by attacking notions of beauty, you attack the notions of truth and fixed notions of morality. And this seems to be the broader culture agenda of the elite, of the Rockefellers. And so this is where you get, you said, aesthetic terrorism, because we have other manifestations of this which are spelled out, I think, easier. One thing is it's been revealed, with the Time Life Empire promoting the drug culture, with the May of 1957 issue that Jan Irvin and Joe Atwell write about in their Manufacturing the Deadhead. The introduction of the drug culture in the 50s, the creation of the teenager, separating the generations, these things with music and entertainment. This is all weaponized art, because these things didn't exist. The whole notion of the teenager didn't exist prior to the 1950s, really. Then you have, within the 60s, of course, right after the assassination of Kennedy, the introduction of the Beatles, and Hoffman writes about that in Psychological Warfare, Secret Society and Psychological Warfare, the important function of the Beatles and these things in the British invasion, the promotion of the drug culture. And so within 10 years later, you have the Summer of Love, which simply would have been possible without this decade of preparation. You also have the exposure of the intelligence agencies and their involvement in the international drug trade, taking it over, and using it. Not only you have the trauma of the Vietnam War, which separates the generations, which is factors into the politics of the era, particularly with Nixon and the silent majority, the creation of hippies, of the deadhead, the drug culture. All these things were manufactured, were promoted through were corporately promoted. Even Allen Ginsberg, you mentioned all these authors. There's a reason why we know who these authors are. It's because the establishment is promoting them. But why are they getting all the press? There are other people out there. Why do we all, not everyone went to Woodstock, but yet it defines the era, it defines the generation, because it's being promoted. And this is the idea of the simulacrum of her notion of what that era represented, because it was completely, or at least mostly, manufactured. Then
without elite sponsorship, most of this stuff would have never taken off. I mean, abstract expressionism, when you look through the eyes of classical culture and look at it with imposing the classical definition of beauty, you look at that and you say, sorry, I don't get it.
Right. One of the reasons that is that aesthetic terrorism seeks to undermine that which Plato referred to as soul knowledge. Okay, and what did Plato mean by soul knowledge? He meant morality. Mm-hmm. And again, this underscores the etymological relationship you have between the term aesthetics, which deals with what is beautiful, and the term ethics, which deals with what is good. If art reflects man's inner yearning for the good, for the beautiful, and yet the art that we see today actually it actually celebrates that which is ugly, that which is base, then it renders moral values completely transient.
Yeah, it's the cult of the weird, cult of the ugly. Yeah.
But when you look at it from this classical perspective, how did this get legs? How did abstract expressionism get legs? Well, I mean, it was promoted through the Museum of Modern Art.
Yeah.
The Museum of Modern Art was founded by Nelson Rockefeller's mother. Nelson Rockefeller was working closely with the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was a CIA front, to to put together different art shows that would for the art shows with abstract expressionism as a theme at the museum. And if you look at the museum, it's like a repository for the CIA, because you have William Paley there. He was one of the founders, one of the founding fathers of the CIA. He was on the museum's board. It's the board of its international programs. You had Tom Braden, who was the first chief of the CIA's International Organizations Division. He was an executive secretary of the museum, going back to the 40s, and so again, what I'm emphasizing here is that none of this garbage would have ever been conflated with art, and would have ever seen the ascendancy that it saw. It would never have taken off without deep pockets behind it, and without very strong benefactors and sponsors with the kind of ties that we go into in the article.
And here's the real damaging aspect of this, because there's a crowding out effect here. Is because if those resources, if genuinely talented artists who can produce classical art, real art, real things of beauty, this requires a lifetime of investment, of support, time, money. And if resources are diverted from that, whether from the taxpayer through National Endowment for the Arts, or through the CIA, unvouchered funds, even from like Marshall Plan money, right? I mean, is promoting this sick modern art to create aesthetic terrorism, to degrade and debase the culture. Classical, beautiful art is not being produced because those artists aren't getting the funding, and they have to go. They have to go find something else to do, or they become really horrible artists.
Right. You do not have artists nowadays concerning themselves with the production of the next Sistine Chapel painting. Mm-hmm. Instead, now you have artists concerning themselves with smearing excrement and minstrel blood across the canvas, mm-hmm. and calling it art. And you bring up the cultural corollaries of all this. Well, there is an excellent case study in the cultural corollaries of the impact of art upon an entire culture. That case study is actually the 1995 sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway. Mm-hmm. Now, one might ask, well, how did this sarin gas attack? How does this reflect the weaponization of the arts? Well, I'll tell you. The cult that carried it out, which was kind of a modern brand of Gnosticism, it was deeply tinctured by Tibetan Buddhism, Hinduism, and Gnosticism. This cult was called Aum Shinrikyo, mm-hmm. right? Okay, Aum Shinrikyo drew its inspiration from Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy. Aum Shinrikyo basically portrayed itself as an elite group of spiritually involved scientists who, like this group in the book, the Foundation trilogy series. There's a group in that particular series of these scientists who develop this discipline known as psychohistory, which allows the scientists to discern future trends from the mass movement of humanity in general. And this psychohistory, this discipline, allows them to portend a coming societal collapse. Likewise, Aum Shinrikyo basically superimposed the template of that fictional group of scientists from Isaac Asimov's trilogy. They superimposed that trilogy upon themselves, believing themselves to also be a spiritually evolved group of scientists, forced to go underground to escape an age of barbarism so as to prepare for the moment when society will be rebuilt in their image. Such a group clearly exemplifies the Gnostic anthropological category of the pneumatikoi, whose alleged gnosis allows them to discern some grand design that's allegedly intrinsic to history. And in the case of Om Shinrikyo, the grand design portended an inevitable nuclear holocaust. So Om Shinrikyo sought to purge the world of the Sukeikoi, of the brute man, the mass animal man. And in purging the world of the Sukeikoi, they would thereby pave the way for a new reality and a new man. And this eschatological narrative is completely derivative of Asimov's Foundation trilogy.
So that's once again, it's life imitating art.
Right. And there's an interesting there's an interesting observation by literary scholar Hutto Weldis concerning Asimov's Foundation trilogy, and this observation concerning Asimov's Foundation trilogy will underscore for us the influence of the global oligarchical establishment upon culture, and will also make abundantly clear the ominous ramifications of that impact in the case study of Om Shinrikyo. Let me read this quote from Hutto Weldis' essay, Popular Culture, Science Fiction, and World Politics. In that particular essay, I'll read it verbatim for the edification of the audience. She states, quote, "The neoliberal discourse of globalization dominating public discussion is a self-fulfilling prophecy that rests on a well-rehearsed set of narratives and tropes, including an Enlightenment commitment to progress, the wholesome role of global markets, a rampant technophilia, the trope of the global village, and the interrelated narratives of an increasingly global culture and an expanded Pacific liberal politics. This discourse displays striking homologies to American techno-utopian science fiction, exemplified in Isaac Asimov's classic Foundation novels.
Yeah.
These homologies help to render neoliberal globalization both sensible and seemingly inexorable. Moreover, underlying Asimov's Foundation universe lies a barely concealed authoritarian politics that alerts us to the covertly but nonetheless demonstrably undemocratic character of globalization and contemporary global governance, unquote. So you see, in light of these homologies, it's not difficult to understand why the popularization of certain myths, in particular those myths that we now see promulgated through the medium of science fiction, are so advantageous to the global oligarchical establishment. These myths both propagate and affirm a well-rehearsed set of narratives and tropes that undergird global governance. Through the science fiction literary genre, the power elite's fanatical millenarian vision for world order is not only rendered tenable, but desirable. Om Shinrikyo merely incarnated that vision, albeit with certain interpretive variations, but that should tell us something about the ominous existential consequences that arise from the adoption of the global oligarchical establishment's Weltanschauung. And you see how the Weltanschauung of the neoliberal discourse of globalization that was imbibed by Om Shinrikyo through the reading of Asimov's Foundation trilogy. And what did it lead to? Sarin gas attacks, people dying. And this reflects the overall mentality. This reflects the overall mentality and outlook of the would-be oligarchs, the would-be rulers of mankind.
It might explain. It might go a long way to explaining the heavy reliance on false flag operations that the deep state has. That the deep state and the global oligarchical establishment have. The Om Shinrikyo's sarin gas attacks might, they were motivated to violence by Asimov, and it might have motivated, science fiction might have motivated the oligarchical establishment and the deep state to similar acts.
Yeah, I see. This it's a funny thing because after I read your article, you sent it to me. Jay Dyer posted an article about modern art that I'd like to quote here. I was getting close to the end here. It was titled Katy Perry's Illuminati and Engineered Modern Art. And if I may just bear with me, he has a good quote. It kind of sums up what we're talking about here. Begins in the paragraph. It goes, "The engineering of art was a decision made by the Rockefeller Foundation workers, the Guggenheim family, the Frankfurt School, working with British Fabians like Bertrand Russell, and the intelligence agencies like the CIA, which the Rockefellers were instrumental in establishing. Concomitant with the rise of garbage art was the rise of feminism and its Rockefeller funding, as well as so they can be seen as connected movements that culminate in the phony drug and sex revolutions of the 1960s. I have detailed this elsewhere, focusing on the Marxist elements behind the above movements. But it is crucial to see that the Marxists were merely one level of this social engineering, as the funding for these Marxist and Frankfurt School degenerates came from international capitalists and their close cousins, the Fabian socialists. Bertrand Russell and the critical theorists of Frankfurt openly stated how all of society would be re-engineered, and a crucial aspect of that change involved the complete control of the arts. In fact, the arts are one of the most powerful, important arms of the machine, as the arts have as much deeper or more powerful impact on the mass consciousness than any Marxist or socialist books ever could." So I thought that was a pretty good compliment to your article.
Oh, absolutely. He eloquently synopsizes it.
Yes.
And the reason being, again, then to bring it full circle, back to the original point, how do people arrive at their Weltanschauungen? How do people arrive at their world views? Because philosophical discourse is not always appealing to the average person, and because it has this extremely elaborate esoteric vernacular, it's not many people are going to take the time to familiarize themselves with it. So what's the medium by which it's conveyed to people? It's conveyed through the arts. The arts do not necessarily concern themselves, nor should they concern themselves all the time with things like logical argumentation and syllogisms. Okay, the arts concerns itself with the conveyance of beauty, with the conveyance of images, whether it be the mental image or an actual visible image. And so what you have with the arts is a medium that wherein particular outlooks, particular Weltanschauungen can be conveyed, and but conveyed with a particular cosmetic trapping to them. And that's why, as we covered earlier, William Wild Bill Donovan, he adopted the practice of psychological warfare from the Nazis. The Nazis originally their term for it was Weltanschauungskrieg, worldview warfare, and that's what the arts is being used to. That's what the arts is being used to wage against the people of the world. Worldview warfare. The objective is to change your worldview, to change the interpretive lens through which you view the world.
Mm-hmm. And that's what, and through the arts, perception management. It's the shadows on the wall. Goes back to Plato and these things.
Right.
So well, listen, guys, I want to thank you. We covered a lot. I think, to grasp the full meaning of this, you should go to the article, of course, Weaponizing the Arts. That's a Conspiracy Archive?
Absolutely, yes, it is.
Okay, get that article. Also, refer you to the Jay Dyer article that I quoted from. That's a good one there, too, at his website, Jay's Analysis. Now, of course, your book, Evoking the Beyond, will be out, sometime in the future.
Right.
Good luck with that.
Hopefully before we're dead.
So that's the, of course, your other books, the Ascendancy, the Scientific Dictatorship. You can get, I guess, at Amazon, right? Is that the
right? You can get the Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship through most online retailers, but the most prevalent one is Amazon.
And please go with the 2006.
Yeah. Now, also, for all your articles, you still want people to go to Conspiracy Archive?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's still the best. Repository for our work.
Okay, great. Well, listen, I'll let you go have dinner, and we'll talk again in the near future. I'll peruse your articles, and if you have anything of interest to send to me, certainly, I'd be happy to read that. And I'll still be watching, or looking out for your material, and we'll talk again.
Well, yeah, we'll be in touch. Thanks for having us on, Tim. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Certainly, thank you for coming on. You're certainly welcome. It's always it's very edifying and interesting. And I'll let you enjoy the late spring, early summer out there. So
you do the same.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Just an aging drummer boy, and in the wars I used to play. Called a tune to many torches session. Now they say I'm a war criminal, and I'm fading away. Father, please hear my confession. I have a legalized robbery, called it belief. I've run with the money, I've hit like a thief. Rewritten history with my armies, my crooks, invented memories. Get blood on the books, and I can still hear his laughter, and I can still hear his song. The man's too big, yeah, the man's too strong. Tried to be meek and I tried to be mild, but I spat like a woman, oh I sobbed like a child. I haven't lived behind the walls, I haven't made me so alone, struggling for peace of mind, which I never have known. I can still hear his laughter, oh I can still hear his song. And it's too big, yeah. The man's too strong. Well, the sun rose on the courtyard, and you all did hear him say, "You always were a Judas, but I got you anyway. You may have got your silver, but I swear upon my life, your sister gave me diamonds, and I lay down with your wife. Oh, Father, please help me, for I have done wrong. The man's too big, the man's too strong."
Thank you.